Bonjour et bienvenue à toutes et à tous. My name is David Horn, and I'm the chairman of the board of the trustees of the Alliance Française de Chicago. It is my pleasure to welcome you today to World Monuments in Paris lecture on the Opéra Comique de Paris, featuring Agne Terrier, artistic advisor and dramaturge. But before we jet off to the City of Light, a reminder that we are using a Zoom webinar format. This means that you can only see the guest speakers. Please use the Q&A feature on your page to ask your questions. They will be answered by our guest at the end of the talk. You are welcome to use the chat to communicate with all participants. Give it a try and tell us where you are listening from. This program is presented in partnership with the Alliance Française de Chicago and the Alliance Française Miami Metro, with communications support from the World Monuments Fund, the French Heritage Society, and the Federation of Alliance Françaises USA. This series is made possible thanks to the generous support of Solange and Bill Brown. Now, a word about the Opéra Comique. Founded in 1714, the Opéra Comique is one of the oldest musical and theatrical institutions in France. It has hosted the premieres of internationally recognized works such as Bizet's Carmen and Massenet's Manon. Its building on the Place Beaulieu in the second arrondissement was destroyed by fire and rebuilt in 1838 and in 1887. And its magnificent Salle Favre between 2012 and 2018, the French state, supported by World Monuments Fund, carried out a major campaign to restore the building, enabling it to fix the parquet floors, mosaics, frescoes, and other decorative elements to regain their original splendor. A few words about Russell Kelly. Russell is the curator and moderator of the past 4 winters lecture series. He has lived in Paris for 30 years and is the author of The Making of Paris, the stories of how Paris evolved from a fishing village into the world's most beautiful city. À vous, Russell.
Merci, David, and bonjour from sunny Palm Beach, Florida. It's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Agnès Terrier. Agnès Terrier has been the artistic advisor and dramaturge of the Opéra Comique since 2007. In that capacity, Agnès develops heritage and other programs for the theater's artistic teams, for guest artists, and for the public. It's Agnès who writes the descriptions of each of the works that are set out in the theater programs that are handed out at the beginning of each performance. Agnès is effectively the chief heritage officer and holder of the institutional knowledge of the Opéra Comique. Last but not least, Agnès is also a professor of French lyrical diction at the Conservatoire National Supérieur de Musique et de Danse de Paris, the higher National Conservatory of Music and Dance, located in the very modern Cité de la Musique in the very modern Parc de la Villette in the 19th arrondissement of Paris. As Agnès will explain, the Opéra Comique is one of 3 opera houses in Paris, sharing the spotlight with the very grand Opéra Garnier on the very grand Place de l'Opéra, which celebrated its 150th anniversary last year, and the very modern Opéra de la Bastille on the very enormous Place de la Bastille, which opened in 1989. While the Opéra Garnier and the Opéra de la Bastille are both larger, much larger, more visible, and better known, the Opéra Comique, with its intimate salle favre and extensive repertoire, including many original works, is truly one of Paris's hidden gems, as Agnès will explain. À vous, Agnès.
Hello, everybody. Many thanks for the invitations. Many thanks to David Horn. Many thanks to Russell Kelly. Many thanks to Ryan Waldron. I am talking to you from my office on the top floor of the theater under the roof. When I look through the window, I can see that night has fallen on Paris now. I am very happy to introduce you to the Opéra Comique, which is at the same time a genre of musical theater, a 310 years old institution, and a wonderful Parisian performance venue. It all began in 1697. That year, King Louis XIV decided to close down a royal institution called the Comédie Italienne, the Italian comedy, and he fired its actors because they had been too insolent towards him. Italian actors played Commedia dell'arte with famous characters you may know, like Harlequin or Scaramouche. You see them in the middle of this picture. They performed alongside Molière's troupe in the same theater, and you can see Molière on this picture on the left. Molière had died in 1673, so with the departure of Italian actors, Parisians found themselves deprived of comic shows. At that time in Paris, there were two large seasonal fairs. This one is the Foire Saint-Laurent, the Saint-Laurent Fair, which took place every summer. In a Parisian fair under the Ancien Régime, there were luxury shops, craftsmen, and shows to enhance the visit. There, small theater groups began to put on musical comedies. Here is the other seasonal fair, the Saint-Germain Fair, which took place in the winter near the Saint-Sulpice Church. The public was working class during the day and very chic in the evening. Here is a map of Paris in the 18th century. As at that time, the maps would put north on the left and south on the right. I turned this one to arrange it as we do today. I circled the Louvre in the center in blue. To the north and south, you see the regular plans of the two fairs. Saint-Laurent was north, outside Paris, in a suburb, and Saint-Germain was in the city, south, on the left bank of the River Seine. In 1715, a woman, that's very important to say, a woman called Catherine Vandrebeck, known as a show entrepreneur, founded the Opéra Comique troupe, the Opéra Comique company. She obtained authorization from the royal administration to perform shows in fairground theaters like this one. The company was private, and Vandrebeck had committed her fortune and the fortune of her shareholders to do that. To attract the audience, you see that the actors used to play the trailer of the show on the balcony. The Opéra Comique did not play on open-air stages, but rented pretty theaters like this one. On the right, you can see the stage sloping towards the room. On the left, you see two floors of boxes for the aristocrats, above a parterre in the center, where the public would watch the show standing. I have to explain comic opera. By comic opera, Vandrebeck defined a show which combined spoken comedy and lyrical singing. But it competed with the two royal troupes, which at that time were the Comédie Française and the Paris Opera. So Vandrebeck quickly made an agreement with the opera, which authorized her to perform in exchange for payment of a fee. On the other hand, the Comédie Française tried several times to have the Opéra Comique banned by forbidding the use of dialogues, for example, which forced the Opéra Comique to play pantomime and display, as here, as you see, the text of the characters on panels, on boards that the actors were holding. It was then the public who sang the dialogues. They were fitting popular songs played by a small orchestra. As you see, the Opéra Comique invented karaoke. A new difficulty arose in 1716. A regent succeeded Louis XIV while waiting for little Louis XV to be old enough to reign. This regent invited the Comédie Italienne, the Italian comedy, to return to Paris. The Opéra Comique then found itself with an important rival competitor, because the Comédie Italienne once again had the status of a royal troupe. So the Opéra Comique started recruiting great personalities. The painter, François Boucher, was chosen to create the decorations. The writer, Charles-Simon Favart, wrote outstanding plays, increasingly removed from Italian models, and which responded to the yearnings of the philosophers of the Enlightenment. Favart's wife, Justine, was known as Madame Favart. She was an extraordinary dancer, singer, and actress, but also an author and a composer. She was the first to play realistically, to wear costumes and accessories consistent with the veracity of her characters. Among her friends was the great English actor who was the greatest Hamlet of his time and a great model for Diderot. Among her creations, you see her at the center in the role of Bastienne, a modest peasant girl, in a play she wrote herself and which later inspired young Mozart for his second opera, Bastien et Bastienne. In the middle of the 18th century, an aesthetic dispute broke out when the Parisian public discovered the works of Pergolese, an Italian composer. So the name of this quarrel is La Querelle des Bouffons, buffoni, as Italian singers. The supporters of Terrier's French opera, you see their performers on the left side, were opposed to the supporters of Italian opera buffa, more lively, more accessible, whose performers you see on the right. French philosophers like Jean-Jacques Rousseau and Denis Diderot preferred Italian opera buffa. In this context, the Opéra Comique easily proved that its shows were very accessible and French. No need to go in Italy or to invite Italian artists. To salute the merits of the Opéra Comique, King Louis XV gave it the status of a royal troupe, but by associating it to the Italian comedy. Opéra Comique temporarily lost its name, but settled all year long in this theater. Fortunately, the two companies would play alternatively, as shown in this poster. The royal power thus noted that the Opéra Comique was always more successful, while the Comédie Italienne was less and less fashionable. Indeed, the Opéra Comique employed the best French composers, Douny, Philidor, and in the center you see Grétry, one of Mozart's models. In 1778, Mozart was staying in Paris for a few months. His goal was to work for the opera or the Opéra Comique. But his father wrote to him, "You must give up this project and return back to Salzburg, because there is a too important rival facing you, Grétry." In 1780, King Louis XVI decided to keep the Opéra Comique as the third royal troupe after the Comédie Française and the Opéra, and to close definitely the Comédie Italienne. The Duke of Choiseul, who was the prime minister of Louis XV and who organized the marriage of Louis XVI to Marie Antoinette, wanted to transform one of his properties into a residential area. He obtained authorization from the king in exchange for beautiful land, which he offered to the Opéra Comique for the construction of a new theater. And you see here on the map the little place in the big garden of the Duc de Choiseul devoted for the Opéra Comique. Just before the French Revolution, the land of the Duc de Choiseul was located in the north of Paris. I have drawn the limits of this land in blue, the perimeter of Choiseul here in blue, in the north of the old Paris that I drew in red. The first Opéra Comique theater therefore opened its door to the south, which was the city at that time, and the theater turned its back on the city's ring road. To the right of this picture is the Rue Favart, which is why the Opéra Comique since then is often called Salle Favart. In the background, you see the hill of Montmartre. It was still the countryside at that time. The theater burned twice in the 19th century, and it was rebuilt twice in the same location, facing south, always facing south. On the right, you can see the theater from which I am speaking to you today. In the meantime, Paris grew bigger. Here you can see in red, in the middle, the place where the Opéra Comique is located today, within the limits of Old Paris, which I have drawn in blue. As you see, Montmartre and the Eiffel Tower were built later, at the end of the 19th century, in the Greater Paris. At the beginning of the 19th century, the Opéra Comique merged with one of its rivals, called the Théâtre Feydeau, on the orders of the Emperor Napoleon. And the Opéra Comique was then relocated in the Théâtre Feydeau, which stood 2 streets from the Salle Favart. During this period, the Salle Favart hosted the troupe of the Italian theater, which opened on the orders of Napoleon to play Italian repertoire. Rossini was the director. There was no competition between the Opéra Comique and the Italian theater, as the 2 repertoires were very different. During the Romantic period, the Opéra Comique recruited excellent singers. This is Jean-Blaise Martin. He was so well known, and he created so many new roles that upon his retirement, he left his name to a new tessiture called Baryton Martin, Martin Baryton. One of the best-known roles for Baryton Martin is Debussy's Péléas, composed 1 century later. Even today, Martin barytons are casted in opera houses around the world. Among the many comic operas created at this time was Boieldieu, Le Postillon de Longjumeau, which Wagner conducted when he was a young conductor, and which he greatly appreciated. Here you see the wonderful American tenor Michael Spires, who sang the role in our 2019 production, and who will come back and sing in our next season. In 1838, the first Salle Favart was destroyed by fire. It was rebuilt, and in 1840, the Opéra Comique moved there again. In this second Salle Favart was created La Damnation de Faust, Faust's Damnation by Berlioz, for example, and also La Fille du Régiment, The Daughter of the Regiment by Donizetti, among many other titles. On the right, you see Johann Sutherland, who came to sing La Fille du Régiment at the Opéra Comique in 1986. The Opéra Comique hall was very elegant. In the 19th century, the lights were not turned off in the hall during shows. The audience was very worldly, The spectators showed themselves and gazed at each other as much as they admired the show. The Opéra Comique was more specifically the theater for families and for the bourgeoisie. You would bring there your wife and your daughter in order to show her to the good society and to organize her wedding, while you would rather bring your mistress to the opera. At the Opéra Comique, the shows were correct and respected morality. Often the stories ended with a wedding. In this context, Bizet created Carmen with the singer Célestine Galli-Marié, who was known for her very realistic interpretations. You see her on the left in the role of Mignon by Ambroise Thomas, one of the greatest successes of the directory. Galli-Marié played and sang the Bohemian Carmen with great daring. This independent woman, Carmen, who changes lovers during the play and who celebrates freedom, shocked the audience, of course. Furthermore, the play ends badly with the murder of Carmen by her lover, Don José. Although Spain used to be fashionable in France at that time, and the partition was magnificent, it ended up with a failure. But 3 months later, 3 months after the creation of Carmen, Bizet died suddenly at the age of 36. This death, which afflicted the public, saved Carmen from oblivion. It is today the French opera which is the most performed in the world, and it is not an opera, it is an opéra comique. A few years later, in 1881, Offenbach's Les Contes d'Hoffmann, The Tales of Hoffmann, was created. Here again, it was a mixture of sadness and success, because Offenbach died a few weeks before the premiere. Here you see the creators of the play, in particular Adèle Isaac, who played all the female roles. Several creations are indebted to American singers. Here you can see Marie Van Zandt, for whom Delibes wrote the role of L'Acme in 1883. Since then, coloratura sopranos have had to be cast to interpret it. Here you can see Sybil Sanderson, who popularized the role of Manon from 1888. She was Massonet's favorite singer, and she inspired him several characters. In 1887, the second Salle Favart was destroyed by a fire, in full performance of Mignon by Ambroise Thomas, the most famous opéra comique of that time. It caused hundreds of victims and shook France. The theater then had to be destroyed, and the French state took 11 years to rebuild it. During that time, the Opéra Comique gave its shows in a theater located on Place du Châtelet. At that moment, the French state entrusted a new mission to the Opéra Comique. Not only did the Opéra Comique play its répertoire, did it create many new plays, and did it introduce young composers, but the Opéra Comique also had to program major foreign operas in French version. Here you can see the famous baritone Lucien Fugère in 3 works that he popularized at the Salle Favart. He sang Bartolo in The Barber of Seville by Rossini, Papageno in The Magic Flute by Mozart, and Falstaff in Verdi's opera. It was at the Opéra Comique that Parisians discovered these masterpieces. The Opéra Comique was so fashionable, performed throughout France and in the colonies, that commercial collectible products were produced, like these cards and these plates. In 1898, the Opéra Comique relocated to the brand new 3rd Salle Favart. Still located in the same spot, it turned its back on Boulevard des Italiens. you see that now Paris had grown behind the Opéra Comique. The Boulevard des Italiens is named after the company of Comédie Italienne, not after the many Italian tourists in Paris. At the west end of this boulevard, of this huge boulevard, was built the Palais Garnier. At the eastern end of this boulevard stands the Opéra Bastille since 1989. But unfortunately, the Opéra Comique turns its back to the boulevard. Here on the left, you can see the entrance hall of the Opéra Comique. It is decorated with two statues representing Carmen on the left and Manon on the right, two young, standing female characters in action. On the right, for you to compare, you see the hall of the Opéra Garnier. It is decorated with four statues representing old male composers sitting in armchairs. How sad does it look, doesn't it? The Opéra Comique has always been the theater for musical comedy, while the opera is the palace of academic music. Have a look at the Salle Favart from indoors. On this photo, the orchestra pit has been raised to stage level. When lowered, it can accommodate up to 55 musicians. Wagner played there in French at the beginning of the 20th century, but this is no longer possible today. But anyway, it is known to have the most beautiful acoustic in France. Fans of Purcell, of Mozart, or of Rossini even say that it is the best acoustic in Europe. This is the room seen from the stage. There are 1,200 seats. The red color is the same as at the Palais Garnier, because the architect, Charles Garnier, said that this color, the red, highlighted the beauty of women and the shine of jewelry. The golden decor shows that at the beginning of the 20th century, the lights were not yet turned off during performance. The cultural habit of turning the lights off during the shows started between the two world wars, once cinema had been born and had become opera's rival. This is the foyer, which welcomes the public during intermissions and where we organize dinners at the end of some performances for our patrons or for galas. In 1898, the Opéra Comique was the most modern theater in Europe, mainly for two reasons. It was the first theater to be entirely lit by electricity, thanks to chandeliers specially manufactured by Christoffel, which featured electric bulbs. And also thanks to the installation of the telephone. It allowed the public subscribing to the Théâtrophone to listen to live shows at home. Marcel Proust was a subscriber and could thus stay in his bed during the performance. Thanks to electricity, the director at that time, Albert Carré, replaced the painted canvas decorations with volume decorations. It was revolutionary. He thus promoted the operas of Puccini, whom you can see on the left, monitoring the rehearsal. In the center, standing, you see Albert Carré directing the staging, with the hat on his head. On the right, conductor and composer André Messager directs the orchestra. And you see some scenes from La Bohème of Puccini at the Opéra Comique. Albert Carré programmed the creation of several masterpieces, such as Péléas et Mélisande by Debussy, again in volume decorations, of which here is a picture. In France, this 1902 opera produced a revolution and returned Romanticism to the past. The beautiful Scottish singer Mary Garden, who sang Mélisande, became the director of the Chicago Opera in 1921. Here is the singer who created Péléas, Jean Terrier, who had a Martin baritone voice. He was Baryton Martin, as I explained. On the left, you see him as Péléas. At the bottom in Marouf, an opera inspired by a tale from the Arabian Nights. At the top right, you see him as Ramiro in Ravel's L'heure espagnole, the Spanish hour. Like all the members of the Opéra Comique troupe, he was as much an actor as a singer, and he later became a very famous cinema actor, spoken cinema. After Debussy, after Ravel, Francis Poulenc worked at the Opéra Comique on several occasions, for Les Mamelles de Tirésias, based on a play by Apollinaire, and after that with Jean Cocteau for La Voix Humaine. Between 1939 and 1989, the Opéra Comique almost disappeared. That is a sad moment of the history of my theater. The Opéra Comique almost disappeared because the French state associated the Opéra Comique with the Palais Garnier to save money, of course, after 1939. You can understand. However, the Opéra Garnier being larger, the common direction of the two theaters got into the habit of programming at the Palais Garnier some of the masterpieces I spoke about. So it was very dangerous for the Salle Favart to lose everything during this period. Fortunately, in 1987, a Baroque opera, Atis by Lully, was programmed at the Opéra Comique to commemorate the tercentenary of Lully's death. The Salle Favart, being smaller than the Opéra Garnier, the management thought it would limit the financial risks. In fact, it was a triumph. This triumph is largely in debt to the conductor of this show, the American William Christie, who became the leader of the rediscovery of Baroque music. And we celebrated here 1 month ago his 80th birthday, his 80th in the room during a performance. Thanks to this show, thanks to Atis in the 80s, the French state recognized that the Opéra Comique was an incomparable theater, and the state restored the independence of Opéra Comique in 1989, when the Bastille was opened. After that, the French state restored the status of National Theatre of the Opéra Comique in 2005. This allows us to be today a theatre of creation. Here you see some of the most important creations of the past 20 years. We also have the mission of programming French and foreign Baroque operas, and of course, the rich repertoire of the institution, with over 3,000 pieces and so many masterpieces. It's not difficult to stick it to our repertoire, and the room is always full. It remains for me to say that the Opéra Comique has been directed since 2021 by Louis Langrée, the greatest current French conductor, who was from 2013 to 2024 the musical director of the Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra, as well as mostly Mozart Festival at Lincoln Center from 2002 to 2023. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much. That was a great presentation. Can you put me back on the video, Ryan? For some reason I can't. Here we go. Start my video. Okay, there we go. Terrific. Merci beaucoup. That was a wonderful overview of the very tumultuous history,
Yes.
it must be said, of the Opéra Comique. We learned a lot of the ups and downs over your long and mouvementé history. I think it was, you taught us a lot of things. First of all, it was very helpful for you to clarify that opera comique is a form of musical comedy with both spoken dialogue and musical singing. I had no idea that it was the origin of karaoke. And
It is.
that was a revelation to us. And also another revelation, there are many revelations. Many of us have wandered by the Opéra Comique, and we discovered, that it overlooks this quite small Place Boieldieu
Mm.
and backs onto the very grand Boulevard des Italiens. And you have explained to us why it backs onto the very grand Boulevard des Italiens, because when it was originally, the first theater was built, there was a wall there. So,
Yes.
so that explains it. You put the back to the wall and the front facing the other way. But later, that wall was torn down and it became the site of the Grand Boulevard. Notably, which, by the way, every 200 meters, the name of the boulevard changes. So that particular section is the Boulevard des Italiens, which you helpfully explained comes from the name of the theater, not the tourists from Italy, which is good. But it appears that there were not one but two opportunities to change the direction of the
Yes.
theater so that it faced the grand, newly opened, wide Boulevard des Italiens. After the theater burned down in 1837 and again in 50 years later. Why didn't the state rebuild the theater facing the main road?
I can explain that. When the Duc de Choiseul gave the ground to the Opéra Comique, he kept a little ground with this form, a little ground between the theater and the boulevard. And on this ground was built a building for flats, with flats. Here, people are living since before the French Revolution. And each time the theater had burned, the firemen came very quickly and could very quickly stop the fire and were able to save this little building that separate us from the boulevard. So each time it could have been possible to rebuild the theater. Of course, the state said it's not possible to buy this building. This building is too expensive. The flats are too expensive. So we have the money to rebuild the theater, but with the same direction, looking south, and we won't be able to turn it on the other side. Otherwise, it would cost twice the price.
Mm-hmm.
And I also saw the question I just looked at a question about why so many fires. Mm-hmm. Well, of course, at that time, people had light with candles. Candles for very, very often in offices, in boxes, etc. And so fire was everywhere. Later, at the middle of the 19th century, there were gas everywhere, lighting with gas, but also there you had little bulb on fire. So it was very easy for a fire to start. And I was told by the historian of the firemen in Paris that there was a fire starting every month in a theater like the Opéra Comique. Every month a fire would start, but wow, people were able to calm it very quickly. Everybody had knowledge about how to extinct a fire. So only twice, the theater was totally burnt.
Uh-huh. And the second time, you said that there were a lot of casualties. Were people killed? They were not able to escape?
Oh, the second fire, it was terrible. And after 3 hours burning, part of the theater, just fell on the floor. And at that time, the doors would not open as you push the door, but the door would open if you just do that very polite, very elegant. So people were very frightened. The fire started on the stage. People who were very frightened wanted to go away, were pushing the doors and couldn't go out. And at that time also, the theater had not as many windows and doors than today. So when people could go out to the room, they couldn't see anything because it was burning. There was a lot of dust and it was night already. So they didn't see nothing. So it was really awful, but the state was never able to say how many people died or were injured. There were great cerebral at Notre Dame, burial, official burial at Notre Dame. There is a monument at the cimetière du Père Lachaise, but we will never know how many people died in the fire. The hall was full.
Wow, how tragic. Amazing photos, by the way, of the interior of the Salle Favart, which is truly spectacular, as were the photos of the foyer.
Yeah.
It's quite interesting to note that the Salle Favart, the new theater, was built 20 years after the Opéra Garnier, and it was quite striking, the similarity, the grandeur of the decorations.
Yes.
I guess it was the
Yes.
style.
Yeah, I didn't tell the name of the architect. His name was Louis Bernier, so quite close to Garnier or Terrier. These are very French names. And Louis Bernier was, of course, younger than Charles Garnier, and Charles Garnier was the president at the head of the jury who chose the project of Louis Bernier. And he chose this project and he told Louis Bernier, now you are going to combine your ideas with my ideas. I am the leader.
I see.
But before that time, the Opéra Comique had never been red, for example. It had been green, blue, yellow, white, I mean the whole. But really, Charles Garnier said, no, red is the only color which is correct for women. And the beauty of women was very important at that time among the audience.
Well, that was also a revelation. First of all, the highest form of flattery is imitation. So Monsieur Bernier flattered Monsieur Garnier by copying his style and adopting his color. But I never realized that the Opéra Comique was the family opera, where the PG, as we say, where you could take your family, whereas you would take your mistress to the Opéra Garnier and visit the dancers backstage later and so on. Okay, very, very different. It's also interesting, the word that comes up when describing the Opéra Garnier, I mean, when the Opéra Comique often is intimate. And you mentioned that the capacity of the Salle Favart is 1,200. And by comparison, I looked it up. The Salle Garnier has a capacity of 2,745. So 2.5 times more. Bastille, Opéra de la Bastille has nearly 2,000 seats as well. So nearly twice as many. So dramatically bigger, but you've got better acoustics. As you mentioned, also, the first version of the Opéra Comique, the people at the parterre would stand. When were seats installed?
During the French Revolution, to calm the audience. Because people were very noisy and claiming and singing revolutionary airs and well, claiming to change the piece or to change the actor. So the state, the revolutionary state, decided to put some banks, comme ça qu'on dit des bancs, long banks, benches. And then at the beginning, it was quite complicated because they didn't understand very soon that you had to put some numbers if you wanted the people to sit calmly. So at the beginning, people were trying to sit, but all on the others. So with this bench, they had to forbid the parterre to the women. Until then, women could come. It was quite dangerous, but women could come in the parterre. And from that moment, when it was with seats, there were only men. And only men until the First World War.
Wow.
Women were not allowed in the parterre. And why? Because you couldn't sit in front, behind, or next to a man you didn't know very intimately. So women were only in the boxes, on the front rank of the boxes, but in the boxes. And they claimed, of course, and before the First World War, they were able to sit at the parterre. And of course, the fashion had to change because they had, at that time, they had little hats and no more big hats on.
Was that true where there were no benches even in the parterre in the Comédie Française as well?
Yes.
Until the Revolution?
Yeah, same thing. And you can also, I have also to precise something. Something even worse was that on the stage of the Comédie Française, there were seats, there were benches for the spectators up to the 1760s. Benches on the stage. So at the Comédie Française, they could only, the actors could only come on the stage and stand in front, in the middle of spectators all around. And people who were sitting on the stage were paying a lot of money to be seen in the show.
Oh my goodness.
So they decided, a big, Le Duc de Logaret, a great aristocrat, decided once, he said, I'm fed up with that. I want to see actors playing. So I will pay the Comédie Française the whole year, just as if there were people sitting on the stage, and you read the people from the stage. And we shall see after 1 year. And after 1 year, of course, everybody said, oh, it's much better. So you see, the uses were so different. So
Absolutely.
different.
Well, great story. Also, one thing that we talked about separately that I think is worth bringing up now is just, we talked about how relatively intimate the seating is, of 1,200 capacity, but also how small the stage is.
Yes.
And what's behind the stage.
So the theater, it is small now, but you have to imagine that at that time, during the 18th century, all the theaters were as small as in fact, our theater was quite correct, it was normal. So now our theater has a stage, which is not very big, 17 meters per 15 meters, but there are no wings. There are no backstage at all. The only little space we have is that at the bottom of the stage, there is a wall, and behind the wall, which has 5 big doors, there is a corridor, a 5 meters wide corridor, which allows people to go from the left to the side and from the side to the left without crossing the stage. But you have to imagine that Louis Bernier, the third architect, had the authorization to put the building 5 meters on the Boyer-Dieu Square. He gained the 4 meters on the square, thanks to the authorization of the city of Paris, because in the 2 previous theaters, there was no space between the wall in the back of the stage and the building. So when the show started, nobody could cross anymore. You had to be on the good side, and you would stay. You would always come in on the stage from the left or from the right. But that used to be the theaters of that time, and you have a big space over the stage to put all the settings. You can elevate all the settings as they were 2-dimensional. You could hold all the settings of a month of shows in the ceiling.
Right. And so that was pretty much, was Garnier the first opera that really had a huge backstage?
Yes, but for Garnier, le baron Haussmann, who was the Minister of Construction in Paris, Haussmann destroyed a big area in Paris, many buildings, many streets. He arose a hill to build the big Palais Garnier and to put big avenues around it, and a big avenue from the Palais des Tuileries, where Napoleon III was living, to the Opera. So yes, the Palais Garnier is huge and has huge backstage, and Bastille has even more, of course. But most of the scores that we are playing today in our theaters, they were composed for little theater as the Opéra Comique. That's very important to know. Wagner never conducted his operas in big opera houses as Bastille. He conducted his own operas in a theater like the Opéra Comique.
Yeah, well, that's a very important point. And I will say that it obviously having no backstage, which is quite a remarkable fact, does present exceptional challenges for set design, but it also provides a great opportunity for very innovative set design, which is what we have noticed in attending performances at the Opéra Comique.
If you attend a performance here, you will never imagine that we have no backstage.
Yeah, no,
we changed the setting many times during the evening. You can't imagine.
It's quite remarkable. So bravo to your set designers. That's another art form in itself. A staggering fact that you mentioned as well is that the Opéra Comique has performed 3,000 separate works of art.
Yes.
Not performances, but
no,
many
it's not. We created the Opéra Comique. The Opéra Comique created more than 3,000 new pieces for more than 3 centuries. And why? Because the Opéra Comique was performing every evening and had to perform 2 operas per evening, not 1, 2. The evenings were very long, so you had to keep the audience to give the audience the opportunity to discover new things. It was just like Netflix today. We can see always new movies. Same at that time, the Opéra Comique was the only place where people were sure to see something new, something nice, something different.
Interesting. Okay, well, I had not appreciated that there were 3,000 new pieces.
Yes.
Which is truly extraordinary. Would the same audience remain for both performances?
Well, yes, of course, because it would start at 6 p.m. and then go through until midnight. So people were staying, but you have to understand that people were, as it was with full light all the evening long, people were coming when they could, and they would leave when they had to leave. So as they knew that they would come once a week, because many people had comment on dit un abonnement? Were subscription. Many people had subscription. They knew they would come once a week, so they could arrive for the second title or go back home before the end of the show. They knew that they would see the piece, the entire piece, within the month, for example.
Okay, so moving to today, how many different works of art does the Opéra Comique perform every year?
Thank you for the question, because yes, we have to come back to the 21st century. At first, you have to know that now, since 1972, we have no more company, no more troupe, singer troupe, no more orchestra, no more chorus. That's how it works now in France. Only the Comédie Française has its own company. The other theaters, sometimes they have their orchestra, but we have no orchestra, no chorus. But what we do is that we engage the best chorus and the best orchestra and the best singers for each play we want to perform. And as we are very small, we can't, it's difficult for us to rehearse and to play in the same time. We have to cross things. So within a year, we perform, we can perform between 8 and 10 pieces. And for each piece, we have between 4 and 10 evenings or performances.
Okay.
And it's very complicated once again because well, now people in the audience, they want to have three-dimensional settings. So once we have the settings on the stage, we can't change what we are showing. So for 10 days or 2 weeks, we would give the same play. And whereas there are repetitions, rehearsals in other places in the theater, but it's complicated. So let's say around 8 productions a year, plus concerts, shows for the young, for the children, for the school, conferences, lectures, recitals, and many other things. We are also a place very used by the cinema. There are many movies which come here. Producers are coming here for 1 or 2 days. They give us a lot of money, that is good. And then we can see the Opéra Comique in many movies. Last year in France, 4 movies had a great success, with each one or 2 scenes which were made in the Opéra Comique.
I can see why. Do you still perform original works?
You mean creation, new works?
Yeah, new works.
Yes. Of course, this year we have 2. This year we have 2 among 8 or 9 productions. We have 2 new operas. Yes.
Okay.
Last year there was 1. Next year there will be 1. And all our productions we associate with other opera houses. We share the cost, the huge cost of opera, with opera houses in France and in Europe.
Are you open? Do you perform during the summer?
No, we don't.
So
We should, but I'm not sure that would be a success. I would like to try for tourists to be open on July, but I don't know if it would be a success. Although we have English subtitles for all performances since more than 10 years, our audience is very French and very Parisian. Whereas at the Opéra Bastille and Garnier, I know the audience is more international, but well, for tourists don't know us very well yet, due to this position, this strange position.
Yes. Well, I think that thanks to your excellent presentation today, a certain number of American tourists and other Anglophone will have a much better understanding of the Opéra Comique, and will seek you out. It is truly a jewel hidden behind the Boulevard des Italiens. Well worth taking that little, is it the Rue Favard that leads from the Boulevard des Italiens to the opening to the Opéra Comique? So I cannot urge our listeners strongly enough to please visit the Opéra Comique. It will delight you. As our presentation today, your presentation, Agnès Terrier, merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Merci.
Introducing us to the Opéra Comique, and also to Gail Nigbar for her help in organizing the talk, and to Patricia Bona, who you have not noticed, but during your talk, she has been putting all sorts of interesting information about the Opéra Comique on the chat line. Yes. So thanks to our partners for your support. Thank you all for joining us today. We hope to see you next week for our 6th and final lecture in this winter's World Monuments in Paris series, when Paul Persetti will tell us about the Saint-Eustache Church near Les Halles. It is the 2nd largest church in Paris after Notre Dame, which has recently undergone an extensive restoration with help from the World Monuments Fund. So thank you again to Agnès for her excellent presentation.
Merci beaucoup.
Merci et au revoir à tout le monde.
Bon après-midi. Au revoir.
Au revoir.